Hi! Hi! How we do? How we doing? I didn't see you there. Hi! Okay, hold on. I was looking for my pen, and I lost it. Hold on. It's around here. I know it is. I just had it. Where is it? Okay, that's weird. Hold on, y'all. Hold on. We gonna get started in just a second. I know I just had my pen here. How did I lose it that fast? That's why it pays to be short in this life. Okay. Okay. It's gotta be in my... It's not in here? Yes. It does. Okay. I can't believe I lost my pen. I just had it. Hold on, y'all. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Hold on. Because I know I just had it. And I was going to write down an important note. Hold on. What did... Aha! It was right under my desk. Just gotta make sure I write this for later so I don't forget. Today is the 28th. Okay. Alright. Just make sure I had to write that down. Hi! You know what time it is. Gotcha! Yes! Yes! We're back! Hi, lovelies! We're back with another installment of Storytime with Chris. As I always say, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max and relax and chillaxing time, between time, mean time, scheme time, study time, break time, CP time, anytime that you want to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. And music, too. I don't own the music that you're listening to in the background, which is brought to you by our friend Mr. Ambiance here on YouTube. Go like, share, and subscribe onto their YouTube channel, Mr. Ambiance. Let's go ahead and get started, because we're back. And Kara has just been revealed that Jacques, one of the Queen's players of this traveling troupe of performers they've just met in the forest after leaving Ungama's house to head their way to Ebelon's territory to get to his cave to take Kara back to Earth to go save her grandmother. Come to find out, Jacques is Kara's grandfather. We're going to see the validity of whether or not that is true. Chapter 9, Fight in the Forest. Kara blinked and stepped backward, too startled to reply at first. When she did catch her breath, she said, "What are you talking about?" Jacques rose to his feet, a hurt look in his eyes. "I thought you'd be pleased." Kara didn't know what to say. 1,000 questions were tumbling through her head, each clamoring to be answered. Was it possible this was true? If not, why would Jacques tell such a story? But if it was, why had her grandmother never mentioned this man? Kara realized with shock and a little sadness how little she really knew of her grandmother's past life. Jacques was still looking at her. In her confusion, she blurted, "But I've never even heard of you." The sorrow in his eyes made her wish he had taken back the words. After a moment, he said softly, "The wedding of the Wanderer to Jacques the Tumbler is recorded in the Chronicles." He paused again, then added, "Do you know about the Unicorn Chronicles?" Kara nodded. "I've been to Grimwald's cave, but I thought he only kept track of stories." "Our wedding was a story," replied Jacques somewhat ruefully, "a day of celebration and catastrophe. However, even if that were not true, it would have been recorded in Grimwald's cave, for he keeps lists of marriages, births, and deaths for all the humans in Luster." "No wonder he's so busy." "Oh, there aren't that many of us. It's the adventures of the unicorns that really keep him busy.
Anyway, we'll find our marriage listed there. Now it is possible that after Ivy returned to Earth,
Jacques broke off, a painful expression twisting his features, and turned away from her for a moment.
I suppose it is possible you are not my blood granddaughter,
he whispered. When he turned back to her, his face was calmer.
That makes no difference to me. You are the grandchild of Ivy Morris. I was once the husband of Ivy Morris. As far as I'm concerned, that makes you my grandchild.
Suddenly, Kara realized that the unicorns had not told her, the players, the true nature of their quest. Do you know what we're doing? She asked softly. Where we're going? Jacques shook his head. I am returning to Earth in order to fetch my grandmother back to Leicester. A stricken look crossed Jacques' face.
Are you sure the Wanderer wants to return?
The last thing Grandma Morris said to me before I jumped into Leicester was, find the old one. Tell her... Kara faltered for a moment just as her grandmother had, then went on. Tell her the Wanderer is weary. Jacques nodded.
Then she is ready to come back.
In his voice, Kara heard such an odd mixture of relief and sorrow, hope and pain, longing and anger, that she could make no sense of it. Why did Grandma go back to Earth to begin with? She asked urgently. I wouldn't have if I were her. I would now, if I didn't have to get her. I love it here.
As did she, replied Jacques. But what you love and what you feel you must do are sometimes different things. More than that, I cannot say. It is your grandmother's story, and I will not tell it for her.
Kara rolled her eyes, but Jacques caught her hand and said urgently,
I know this is frustrating to hear, but this is a matter of honor and trust. It is not my story to tell.
Kara held herself stiff for a moment, then relaxed. All right, she said. I understand. Which was almost true. When the other players learned Jacques was leaving them, there was a great deal of hugging and crying that had to be accomplished before they would let him depart. Finder stood next to Kara while this was going on. Look at Moonheart, the big unicorn whispered. Kara glanced over at their leader. His nostrils were flared, his eyes hard, his mouth set in a grimace of annoyance. He doesn't like sentimental goodbyes, said Finder. When the farewells were finally over, the two groups headed their separate ways. As they walked along the riverbank, Kara listened to the singing of the players grow dim behind them. Even after the last voices had faded, she could hear the slight boom of their drum. Finally, even that was gone. She looked around and smiled. What an odd group they made. 3 unicorns, 3 humans, and a squidgem. Even in her wildest daydreams back on Earth, she had never imagined that someday she would be trekking across another world, a world of unicorns in such company. But maybe this was the life of a wanderer. Or at least the granddaughter of a wanderer. Her thoughts were interrupted by the squidgem, who came bouncing up from behind, scrambled onto her shoulder, and began chattering in her ear. She walked beside Jacques off and on during the day, drawn to him, but distrustful as well. It was as if her heart was at war with itself. Part of it wanting to accept him at once as her grandfather, another part holding back fearful, thinking only that here was one more person who could abandon her, betray her. For his part, he looked sad each time she stepped away from him, or more precisely, sadder than usual. Since his normal look was one of melancholy, that changed whenever she returned to his side. Then his eyes would brighten and a smile would struggle briefly across his well-creased face. They did not talk much, though late in the day she began to tell him some of the adventures they had befallen her since she had crossed into Leicester. Goodness. He listened solemnly and once put his arm around her shoulder and drew her to him, as if wishing he had some way to ease her memories. Their path took them upward for most of the day. By the time they emerged from the woods into a high rocky area, Kara's legs were aching. The afternoon sun was dropping lower in the sky to their left when the travelers began to follow a track that led along the edge of a drop so deep it made Kara uneasy to look at the river below. Which is kind of like me, because I'm afraid of heights. I love the idea of flying. I love the idea of soaring high above the clouds. But I do have a fear of heights. Like, being too high up causes me to get incredibly anxious. Evening was falling fast as the path dipped into forest once again. It was much darker under the trees than it had been in the open, and the travelers had gone only a little way into the woods when they decided they should stop for the night. Kara was glancing around for a good resting place when she heard something rustling in the darkness. She reached for Finder. A twig snapped somewhere off to her right. What was... Her words were cut off by a hideous screech as a band of delvers burst from the underbrush. They were only about 3 feet tall, but there were well over a dozen of them, all clutching short spears. In the dim light, their enormous eyes seemed almost to glow in their oversized heads. Immediately, the 3 unicorns positioned themselves around the humans. At the same time, Kara put her hand to the blade Umgama had given her. Her heart pounded with fear. She had been attacked by a delver only moments after she first arrived in Luster, and she remembered too clearly the feeling of the little monster's wiry hands around her throat. The delvers rushed forward. Kara's fear turned to stark terror when they began chanting, "Get her! Get her! Get her!" The unicorns reared and kicked, their cloven hooves slashing through the air like silvery knives. The first blow was struck by Moonheart, who caught one of the delvers on the shoulder. With a shriek, the murderous creature dropped his spear and staggered back. The other delvers fell away for a second, then rushed forward again. Shrieking louder than ever, they jabbed viciously at the unicorns' bellies with their spears. Belle spun and kicked backwards, sending 2 of the screaming monsters into the brush. Kara watched, trembling with terror, rage, and frustration. The squidgem clinging to her neck cried encouragement to the unicorns. "Get him! Get him! Get him! Hit him, unicorns! Hit him hard!" Beside her, Thomas was fumbling with one of his many watches, muttering angrily to himself about not being better prepared. Jacques had drawn a knife from his tunic. He kept trying to position himself to protect Kara, but that was almost impossible since the delvers were attacking from all sides. Kara drew her sword. The hilt was cold in her hand. She held it before her, ready to slash, wishing desperately that she knew more about using it. Suddenly, the mannequin set up a weird cry, a piercing elation that was one of the most horrifying sounds she had ever heard. She dropped her blade and clapped her hands to her ears, trying to shut out the delver's screeching, which seemed to slice into her like a living knife. She could see the unicorns shaking their heads violently as if trying to drive out the cries from their ears. A half a dozen of the delvers stopped chanting, while the rest continued their weird cries. These 6 tightened their grips on their spears and started forward. Belle trumpeted in rage, dashing toward them. She struck one down with her hooves. The others fell back, but the horrible chanting continued, and Kara could see that it was making it hard for the unicorns to focus on the battle. "Aha!" cried Thomas in sudden triumph. "This should do the trick." Fingers working frantically, he wound one of his many watches, then held it up and flipped open the lid. As if sound itself had vanished from the world, a complete and utter silence fell over the battle. The delvers looked so baffled, their huge eyes goggling in shock as their mouths moved but produced no sound, that Kara couldn't help but laugh. To her astonishment, no sound came from her own mouth either. Thomas winked at her. The unicorns took advantage of the delvers' surprise to rush them. The silence of the fighting that followed, the absolute lack of cries of anger or shrieks of pain, of trumpets, whinnies, or shouts, or of even the sound of foots and hooves was eerie. Kara couldn't even hear the squidgem, though he was still on her shoulder, shaking his paws at the enemy and clearly shouting all sorts of scathing insults. For a moment it looked as if the unicorns would win. Their flying feet and snapping mouths, more vicious in battle than Kara would have thought possible, kept the enemy at bay. But they were hampered by fighting in the woodland, where the obscuring trees gave an advantage to their small foes. Then Finder stumbled, tripped over a delver, and fell to the ground. This was all the delvers needed. In an instant, they were swarming over the big unicorn like ants on a sweet, and in the silence created by Thomas's spell, neither Belle nor Moonheart could hear his desperate whinnies, nor Kara's cry of rage and horror. Snatching up her blade from where she had dropped it when the delver chat had begun, Kara raced forward to help Finder. Before she could reach him, more delvers burst through the opening created by Finder's fall and began leaping in to attack Belle and Moonheart. Kara lashed out with her blade. Despite her lack of training, her first swing struck home. The feel of the blade as it entered delver flesh, the spurt of green blood, made her stomach turn, but her rage at these creatures who attacked her and her friends overwhelmed the fear and disgust. With a ferocious cry, she pulled her blade free. 2 other delvers took the place of the one she had struck down. She swung at them, clutching the blade as hard as she could. At the same time, more delvers poured toward them. Thomas clapped his watch close, dropping it to dangle at his side. Sound flooded the scene of the battle, sudden as an unexpected thunderclap. But now the noise was all wild and chaotic. The delver chant was done, the little monsters too absorbed in the fight to continue their evil chorus. Thomas pulled another watch from his pocket, swung it around his head, and lashed at the delvers with it. Where it struck, Kara could hear the hiss of burning flesh. Jacques shouted wildly from behind her. Before she could turn, he came handspringing past her into the midst of the Delvers. He landed on his feet and began slashing about him with a short blade while the Delvers stabbed at him with their spears. All this Kara saw in a flash, that her attention was all on her own fight, for the Delvers went after her as well. She continued to slash out with the blade Gamma had given her, wishing as she did that she knew something, anything about how to use it properly. Even so, she was able to keep the monsters at bay and severely wounded more than one of them. It was not enough. Soon, a Delver grabbed her from behind, pulling her arms back with a fierce yank. Her shoulders bursting with pain, she cried out and dropped her blade. That didn't stop her from also kicking out, and the Delver in front of her fell with a surprised cry. With a snarl, her captive tightened his grip on her arms. He swung her around. Kara cried out in astonishment. And that is where we will end for today. Told you, it's going to keep you on the edge of your seat. And as always, my lovelies, I appreciate you all staying here and enjoying Storytime with Chris with me. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.